Imagine it's late autumn, the fields are bare, and the cold winds are settling in. For our grandparents, the question was simple. How do we make this harvest last until spring? They answered with cellars stacked with roots, jars sealed tight, and smokehouses full of flavor. These tricks they used turned hard times into security. Today, most of them are nearly forgotten, but they still hold the power to inspire every gardener. Here are 20 old-time ways Grandma turned a fall harvest into winter survival. Root cellaring. Before refrigerators, the cellar was the family's treasure chest. Potatoes, carrots, beets, and turnips were packed away in bins or barrels, kept cool and damp beneath the earth. The steady temperature and high humidity slowed decay, turning a single harvest into months of dependable meals. Families layered roots in straw or tucked them in wooden crates, making sure air could flow, but light could not. Too much warmth meant sprouting. Too much dryness meant shriveling. Done right, these vegetables stayed crisp and hearty until spring, long after the garden outside was frozen solid. Children grew up with the comfort of knowing that supper could always be fetched from the cellar, whether it was boiled beets, mashed potatoes, or carrots in stew. Root cellaring was more than storage. It was survival stacked neatly underground. Canning with mason jars. Grandma's pantry was lined with mason jars that gleamed like treasure. Peaches floated in golden syrup, beans waited in neat rows, and meats from the fall butchering sat sealed tight for winter meals. She trusted the hiss of the pressure canner and the steady boil of the water bath, knowing each jar meant security when snow covered the garden. Children remembered the satisfying pop of a lid sealing, proof that the food inside would last for months. Those jars turned hard work in summer into comfort in January, when fresh food was only a memory. Every shelf told a story of thrift and care, each one a promise that no matter how long the winter stretched, there would always be something nourishing to bring to the table. Drying apples into apple chips. On crisp autumn days, Grandma sliced apples into thin rings and laid them out to dry. Sometimes they rested on racks near the wood stove. Other times they were strung on twine and hung in warm kitchens. Slowly, the fruit lost its moisture, but kept its sweetness, turning into chewy apple chips that children loved to sneak from crocks and jars. These dried slices were not just a snack, but also a reminder of sunny orchards during the grayest days of winter. Packed away in tins or stoneware, they lasted for months, ready to brighten porridge, pies, or a child's empty hand. Apple chips carried the taste of autumn into January, proof that even simple scraps of fruit could bring comfort and joy long after the orchard had gone quiet. Packing cabbage into crocks. When cabbages came in from the garden, Grandma wasted no time turning them into sauerkraut. She shredded the crisp heads, sprinkled them with salt, and pressed them firmly into heavy stoneware crocks. A wooden weight held everything beneath the brine, and within weeks the cabbage began its quiet transformation. The kitchen carried a tangy scent, sharp at first, but soon familiar and welcome. By midwinter, the crock offered spoonfuls of sour crunch that brightened suppers of potatoes or pork. Families valued it for flavor, but also for health, since it supplied vitamins when fresh greens were gone. Children remembered dipping into the crock with curiosity, their first taste puckering their mouths. For Grandma, sauerkraut was not a luxury, but a steady companion through the season, a food that lasted as long as the snow. Layering carrots in sandboxes. Grandma knew that carrots could be coaxed to last until spring if treated with care. After harvest, she packed them carefully into wooden boxes filled with slightly damp sand, making sure the roots never touched. Buried this way and kept in a cool cellar, the carrots stayed crisp and bright orange for months. Children remembered pulling them from the sand in midwinter, brushing off the grains before handing them to their mother in the kitchen. It was like digging treasure out of the earth long after the garden outside had frozen solid. This method cost nothing more than a box and a little sand, yet it kept fresh vegetables on the table when the fields were bare and the family depended on what the cellar could provide. Hanging braided onions and garlic. After harvest, Grandma laid her onions and garlic out to dry, their skins turning papery in the autumn air. Once cured, she braided the stems together into long ropes and hung them from pantry beams or kitchen hooks. The braids kept bulbs off damp floors, safe from rot, and easy to reach when a stew or roast needed flavor. Children remembered brushing past them, the faint smell of garlic filling the air. Sometimes the braids stretched almost to the floor, a mark of plenty and good work done in the garden. Each bulb held the taste of summer soil carried forward into winter suppers. Hanging braids was both storage and display, a daily reminder that thrift and tradition could turn even the humblest crop into a treasure. Stringing hot peppers. In Grandma's kitchen, a string of peppers often hung in the window, their colors deepening from green to fiery red. These ristras were both beautiful and practical. Threaded carefully on sturdy twine, the peppers dried slowly in the open air, their skins wrinkling as they preserved themselves. Through the winter, she could pluck one or two to flavor soups, beans, or stews, each dried pod carrying the warmth of summer fields. Children remembered the bright strands swaying lightly when a door opened, sunlight catching the glossy skins. By spring, the string might be faded, but the peppers inside still packed plenty of heat. Stringing peppers was simple work, yet it gave months of spice, proving again that nothing in Grandma's garden ever went to waste. Storing pumpkins and winter squash. Grandma knew which pumpkins and squashes would last the longest, and she set them aside carefully after the fall harvest. First, they were cured in a warm, dry place so their skins toughened. Then she carried them to a cool corner of the house or cellar where air could move around them. There, their bright rinds glowed like lanterns against the dim walls. Families counted on them for pies, soups, and roasted suppers well into the new year. Children remembered the satisfaction of carrying one up the cellar steps, heavy in their arms, to be split and baked on cold nights. These sturdy fruits were the keepers of winter, proof that with patience and care, the garden's gifts could last until spring returned again. Pressing apples into cider. When the orchard gave its final harvest, Grandma gathered bushels of apples, not just for pies, but for cider. The fruit was washed, chopped, and pressed in sturdy wooden presses that creaked under the strain. Golden juice ran into buckets, sweet and sharp at the same time. Some was sipped fresh on crisp afternoons, while the rest was stored in barrels where it turned into hard cider for winter. Families remembered the smell of apples filling the yard, sticky hands from turning the press, and the satisfaction of jugs lined up ready for the cold months. Cider was more than a drink. It was a way to carry autumn into January. With every pour, it recalled sunny orchards and family workdays long after the trees had gone bare. Making fruit preserves and jams, Grandma's stove bubbled all through late summer and autumn, kettles full of fruit and sugar cooking down into jam. Strawberries, peaches, and plums turned into thick preserves that gleamed like jewels when spooned into jars. Sugar was the secret, acting as both sweetener and preservative, making sure the spread would last through the winter. Children remembered waiting with eager spoons for the foam skimmed off the top, a sweet taste of what was to come. On cold mornings, a bit of jam spread over bread brightened the meal, turning simple fare into something comforting. Each jar carried the memory of sunlit orchards and berry patches, saved carefully to bring joy when days were short. Jam was not just food, it was the taste of summer, sealed tight against the snow. Smoking meat and fish. When fresh meat couldn't be eaten right away, Grandma turned to the smokehouse. Strips of pork, beef, or fish were salted, hung carefully on racks, and bathed for days in fragrant wood smoke. Hickory and applewood added their own character, turning plain cuts into food that lasted far beyond butchering day. Families remembered the rich smell drifting across the yard, a signal that winter meals were being prepared. Slices of smoked ham or trout appeared at the table long after snow had covered the ground, each bite carrying the warmth of the fire that preserved it. Smoking wasn't just about saving food. It added depth and flavor that became part of family tradition, proof that even in lean times, meals could feel rich and worth gathering around. Pickling cucumbers, beans, and beets. Grandma never let summer's bounty go to waste. When cucumbers, beans, or beets were piled high, she reached for her Crocks and vinegar. With dill, garlic, mustard seed, and a little sugar, she transformed fresh vegetables into pickles that lasted all winter. The sharp scent of brine filled the kitchen, stinging noses but making mouths water. Children remembered hearing the clink of jars being set on shelves and later pulling them out to brighten suppers of meat and potatoes. A single pickle could turn a plain meal into something lively and sharp. Pickling was thrifty, practical, and endlessly creative, as every household had its own recipe. For Grandma, it was never just preservation, it was tradition, and every jar carried her careful hand into the months when the garden slept. Drying beans and shelling peas. Grandma knew beans and peas were too valuable to waste. She let pods dry right on the plant, rattling in the late summer breeze before bringing them indoors. Around the kitchen table, children helped shell peas and beans into bowls, their laughter mixing with the patter of seeds. Once dried fully, the beans were stored in jars or sacks, ready for soups, stews, and hearty meals all winter long. The sound of beans pouring into a pot was the sound of nourishment that would never run out. Drying meant the crop was secure, no matter how long the winter stretched. Families remembered cold evenings when bean stew simmered for hours, filling the house with comfort. These small seeds carried a whole season's promise, tucked away for the hardest months. Turning milk into cheese or butter. When fresh milk was plentiful, Grandma wasted none of it. Some was churned into butter, the rhythm of the dasher echoing in kitchens as children took turns working the cream. Golden pats were wrapped and stored, ready for baking or spreading on bread. The rest was coaxed into cheese. Cultures and rennet turned milk into curds, which were pressed and aged until firm. A wheel of cheese in the cellar meant protein and nourishment through months when cows gave little. Families remembered the pride of cutting into a new wheel, the tang and richness unmatched by store-bought. Cheese and butter were more than just foods. They were proof of hard work and skill, reminders that nothing from the farm was wasted and every drop had a purpose. Saving lard and tallow when hogs were butchered in the fall, Grandma carefully saved the fat. She rendered lard in heavy pots, letting it melt slowly until it turned clear and clean. Tallow from beef was treated the same way. Once cooled, it was stored in crocks or tins in a cool pantry. This fat became the foundation for everyday cooking, from frying potatoes to baking pies. It was also used in soap making and candles, proving its importance beyond the kitchen. Children remembered the warm, savory smell drifting through the house on butchering day, and the jars of white lard lined neatly on shelves. Nothing from the animal was wasted, and the fats carried families through winter with both food and light when little else was available. Fermenting root vegetables in barrels. Grandma often filled wooden barrels with root vegetables layered in brine. Turnips, carrots, and beets were packed tightly with salt and weighted down to keep them submerged. Over weeks, natural fermentation transformed them into tangy staples that lasted all season. The barrels were kept in cool cellars or sheds where the air smelled faintly sour but familiar. This method gave families food when gardens lay frozen and fresh produce was impossible to find. Children remembered dipping into the barrel for a crunchy, salty piece that brightened otherwise plain meals. Fermentation was simple, needing little more than vegetables, salt, and patience. The barrel stood quietly in the corner through winter, holding food that was ready whenever the family needed it most. Packing apples in straw bushels of apples were too precious to lose, so Grandma packed them with care. Each apple was laid gently in a wooden crate lined with straw, with more straw between the layers to keep them from touching. Stored in a cool, dark cellar, the straw kept the fruit cushioned and insulated against frost. Families could open a crate months later to find apples still crisp and sweet, long after the orchards were bare. Children remembered the rustle of straw and the smell of fresh apples rising when the lid was lifted. These crates turned autumn's harvest into a steady supply of fruit for pies, cider, and everyday eating. Packing apples in straw was a simple act of protection that kept a taste of the orchard alive through winter. Saving corn as dried kernels. When the cornfields turned dry and golden, Grandma saved more than just ears for roasting. She shelled the kernels and spread them out to finish drying until they rattled hard in her hands. Once fully dry, the kernels were poured into sacks or jars and stored in the cellar. All winter, they were ground into meal for cornbread, mush, or Johnny cakes. Sometimes, whole kernels were boiled into hearty dishes that filled hungry stomachs on cold nights. Children remembered the sound of the hand-cranked mill and the smell of fresh cornbread baking in cast-iron pans. Corn was more than a summer crop. Dried properly, it stretched across the entire year. Grandma's sacks of kernels made sure no harvest was ever wasted and the table was never empty. Making jerky, Grandma believed every scrap of meat had value. Leftover cuts were trimmed, salted, and hung near low fires or laid on racks to dry slowly. The process removed moisture, leaving behind lean strips of meat that kept for weeks or months. Jerky became a quick source of protein, easy to carry in pockets or to crumble into soups and stews. Children remembered chewing on the tough, savory strips during chores or trips to town. The flavor was strong, smoky, and satisfying when other foods were scarce. Nothing went to waste, and jerky turned ordinary cuts into lasting food. In lean winters, it gave families both nourishment and peace of mind, knowing there was always something ready to eat when the cupboard looked bare. Boiling down syrup. Grandma welcomed the sweet season when sap ran from maples or sorghum cane was harvested. Buckets of sap were gathered and poured into large kettles where they boiled for hours over open fires. Steam rose into the cold spring air while the liquid thickened into golden syrup. It took patience and steady stirring to keep it from scorching, but the reward was jars of sweetness that lasted long after sugar was gone. Families poured it over pancakes, stirred it into porridge, or used it in baking when other sweeteners were scarce. Children remembered dipping spoons into the warm syrup, licking their lips as the steam fogged their faces. Syrup making was hard work, but it filled shelves with comfort that carried families into the next season. These old tricks were simple, but they kept families fed when winters were long and stores were bare. Grandma relied on cellars, crocks, and jars, turning every harvest into meals that lasted for months. Many of these methods still work today, and they can bring a touch of the past into any garden or homestead. If you enjoyed learning about them, give this video a hype and subscribe so more people can learn these amazing tricks.